I had always thought my relationship with Dave was perfect. We had a small, cozy apartment in a quiet neighborhood, and I was convinced we were happy. Until one night, things changed forever. Our days were simple, mornings spent over coffee, evenings watching TV on the couch, and weekends with nothing but each other for company. But, as perfect as it seemed, there was always this lingering sense that something wasn't quite right, though I could never put my finger on it. It's a feeling you try to ignore, thinking it's just your mind playing tricks on you. But that night, everything would shatter. It was a Tuesday, a normal Tuesday. I was getting ready for bed when I heard the knock at the door. At first, I thought it might be a mistake, maybe one of the neighbors, but the knock came again, soft, hesitant. When I opened the door, standing in front of me was Jenna, my neighbor from 2 doors down. She looked strange. Her blonde hair was a bit disheveled, and her eyes were red, as if she had been crying. She gave me a small, awkward smile, though her hands were trembling slightly. "Hey, I'm sorry to bother you this late," she said, her voice sounding a little shaky. But I couldn't sleep. I just needed someone to talk to. I didn't know what to say. Jenna and I hadn't really spoken much outside of casual greetings. She had always seemed friendly enough, but I never expected a late-night visit like this. Still, I didn't want to be rude. Maybe something was bothering her, and she needed a distraction. "Sure, no problem," I replied, stepping aside so she could come in. "Do you want something to drink?" She nodded, her gaze flicking nervously toward the living room, where Dave was sitting on the couch, scrolling through his phone. He barely glanced up when we entered, a quick nod being the extent of his acknowledgement. That was the first thing that struck me as odd. Normally, he'd greet anyone who came to the door, even if it was just for a minute. "Would you like some tea?" I offered again, trying to break the tension. She nodded, and I quickly went to the kitchen to prepare it. Jenna sat on the couch, her back straight, her hands clasped together in her lap. I couldn't help but notice that she kept stealing glances at Dave. She did it subtly, but I could tell it wasn't just casual glances. It was like she was studying him, watching him with a look I couldn't quite place. I returned with the tea and sat across from her, unsure of what to say. "Is everything okay?" I asked, trying to sound casual, though my mind was starting to race. She took a deep breath and started talking about work, how stressful it had been recently, how she felt overwhelmed. I could tell she was trying to focus on something neutral, but her voice quivered slightly. There was something more going on, something she wasn't saying. But before I could press her, she suddenly looked at me with an expression I couldn't read. Her lips parted as though she was about to say something else, something more personal. "It's just," she began, trailing off. "You know, sometimes when you feel alone, you can't help but feel like you're missing something." Her words hung in the air for a moment. I frowned, wondering what she meant by that. She quickly shifted her gaze to the floor, as if embarrassed by what she had just said. "I get that," I replied, though I was more confused than anything. I had no idea where this conversation was going, but I wasn't sure how to steer it back to something safe. I tried to make small talk, but the awkwardness between us grew heavier. I could feel the space between us expanding, and I wondered if maybe I had misjudged the situation. Jenna wasn't the kind of person to open up like this, at least not with me. It felt off. The more she talked, the more I realized how much she was avoiding looking directly at me. Her words seemed rehearsed, like she was hiding something. But what? Why come to me now, after all this time? I glanced at Dave, who was still engrossed in his phone, oblivious to the tension that was building in the room. She continued to talk about how much she appreciated the quiet comfort of the neighborhood, how much she loved living so close to us. But in the back of my mind, I couldn't shake the feeling that there was something more to this visit than a simple late-night chat. Every time she spoke, I couldn't ignore the way her voice would waver or the way her eyes would shift toward Dave, as if she were searching for something. I tried to push aside the discomfort and listened as she talked about her past relationships, her lonely nights spent at home. She wasn't exactly crying, but the sadness in her voice was palpable. I sympathized with her, though something in my gut told me that there was more to her visit than she was letting on. But I stayed quiet, unsure of how to navigate this strange situation. I couldn't deny the growing unease in my chest. Something wasn't right. Was this just a lonely woman seeking comfort, or was it something more? Was I being too paranoid, or was she actually trying to tell me something? As the night wore on, Jenna's mood shifted. Her conversation started to drift from casual chatter to something more intimate, more revealing. She spoke about the loneliness she had been feeling lately, how the pressure of work and the isolation of living alone had begun to weigh heavily on her. But there was something in her words that made me uneasy. It was almost as if she was fishing for some kind of sympathy, something I wasn't sure I could offer. I could feel the tension in the air thickening. I had been trying to be a good listener, but the constant glances Jenna kept throwing at Dave, quick, almost imperceptible looks, were hard to ignore. Every time she mentioned something personal, her eyes would flit over to him, as if she was measuring his reaction. But he wasn't paying attention. He was still absorbed in his phone, unaware of the subtle shifts in the room. Or at least, that's what I told myself. There was a moment when she leaned forward slightly, her voice lowering. "You know, sometimes you don't realize what you're missing until it's too late," she said, her words hanging in the air like a quiet confession. I didn't respond immediately, unsure of how to interpret the statement. Was she talking about her life in general, or was she speaking about something more specific? My heart began to race, and I couldn't shake the sense that there was more she wasn't saying. I tried to deflect, offering a weak laugh. "Yeah, life can surprise you like that sometimes," I said, attempting to keep things light. But Jenna didn't laugh. Instead, she looked down at her hands, her fingers fiddling with the edge of her mug. "I've always admired you and Dave," she continued, her voice softer now. "You two seem like you have everything together. You know, the kind of couple everyone wants to be." Her words were kind, but there was an undertone in her tone that felt off. It was as if she was trying to tell me something, but wasn't quite ready to say it. I smiled politely, feeling the discomfort rising in my chest. "We're just figuring it out like everyone else," I said, trying to brush off the compliment. But Jenna wasn't done. She took a deep breath, as if gathering her thoughts, and then looked at me with wide, almost pleading eyes. "I don't want to make you uncomfortable, but I've been feeling really lost lately." Her voice wavered as she spoke, and I could see the pain in her eyes. But beneath that pain, there was something else, something I couldn't quite put my finger on. "I'm sorry to hear that," I said, but I couldn't shake the nagging feeling that this conversation was heading in a direction I wasn't prepared for. Jenna sighed and took a sip of her tea, the silence between us growing heavier. "It's just that sometimes you can't help who you're drawn to," she murmured, her eyes flickering back to Dave once again. This time, I couldn't ignore the strange, knowing look in her eyes. It was as if she were daring me to acknowledge something I wasn't ready to face. My pulse quickened. I tried to play it off, but I felt the weight of her words pressing against me. She couldn't possibly mean what I thought she meant. But the more she spoke, the more I felt the chill creeping up my spine. I had to say something, but the words wouldn't come. I could feel my mind racing, trying to piece together what was happening in front of me. "Are you okay?" I asked, my voice sounding more unsure than I intended. Jenna smiled faintly, but there was no warmth in it. "I'm fine," she said quickly, almost too quickly. I don't know what's happening to me lately." Her words hung in the air, but I didn't know how to respond. The things she was saying didn't make sense, not at first. She was talking about loneliness, about feeling disconnected, about being drawn to someone. But who? Was she talking about Dave? My stomach churned at the thought, but I pushed it aside, trying to convince myself that I was overthinking things. "Maybe you just need a break," I suggested, though my voice didn't sound as convincing as I wanted it to. Jenna didn't answer right away. Instead, she just stared at her cup, lost in thought. The silence between us grew unbearable. And then, as if it were nothing at all, she looked up at me and said it. "I know you probably think I'm crazy," she said softly, "but I can't help how I feel. I've been trying to ignore it, but I just can't anymore." My heart skipped a beat. I had been waiting for the other shoe to drop, but hearing the words aloud made it all the more real. My mind raced, but I couldn't find the words to say. What was she talking about? Was she confessing something about herself? Or was this about Dave? The thought was too unbearable to consider, but there it was, hanging in the air between us. She looked at me with a strange mixture of guilt and vulnerability, as if she was hoping I would understand. But I didn't understand. I didn't want to understand. "I don't know what you mean," I said finally, my voice barely above a whisper. But Jenna didn't answer me. Instead, she stood up abruptly, her chair scraping against the floor. "I should go," she said quickly, as if suddenly realizing how much she had revealed. "I'm sorry for disturbing you. I just needed to get that off my chest." She made her way to the door and I followed, still in a daze. But before she left, she turned back to me, her eyes softening for a moment. "Just think about what I said," she whispered, and then she was gone. I stood there, staring at the door, the silence deafening. The conversation had left me unsettled, unsure of what I had just heard. But one thing was clear. Jenna wasn't just looking for someone to talk to. She had come here for a reason, one I wasn't yet ready to face. The next few days felt like a blur, my mind racing with everything that had happened. Jenna's words echoed in my head, and I couldn't shake the feeling that something was deeply wrong. She had come over in the dead of night, opened up about her loneliness, and then, without ever fully saying it, hinted at something far more troubling. At first, I tried to convince myself that I was overreacting. Maybe she just needed someone to talk to. Maybe I was imagining things. But the more I replayed the conversation, the more the pieces started to fall into place, and they didn't fit in a way that made sense. I couldn't ignore the connection between Jenna's words and the way she'd been looking at Dave. It was late one evening when I couldn't take it anymore. I knew something had to be going on. The feeling of doubt had been gnawing at me since Jenna left, and I had to confront it, no matter how uncomfortable it made me. I decided to check Dave's phone. I didn't want to do it. I knew it wasn't right. But the impulse was too strong. Something in my gut told me I had to know the truth, even if it was painful. I picked up his phone, heart pounding in my chest. He was in the bathroom, so I had a few minutes of privacy. I scrolled through his messages, trying to stay calm. At first, everything seemed fine, just casual texts with friends, reminders, work stuff. But then I found something that made my blood run cold. A message from Jenna. It wasn't just a friendly check-in or casual chat. No, this was personal. Too personal. The words were innocent enough on the surface, but they carried a weight that hit me like a punch to the stomach. I miss you, the message said. Can't stop thinking about you. I know it's crazy, but I can't help how I feel. The words were a confession, a subtle admission of something more than friendship. The same feeling of unease I'd been carrying around surged up inside me. I couldn't believe what I was reading. Was this an affair? Were they seeing each other behind my back? My hands shook as I reread the message. The door creaked open behind me, and I jumped, quickly locking the phone and shoving it onto the couch. Dave stepped into the room, looking confused. "What are you doing?" he asked, his voice casual, unaware of what I had just discovered. I stood frozen for a moment, my mind scrambling for the right words. I wanted to yell at him, demand the truth, but something held me back. Instead, I walked over to the window, trying to steady my breathing. "What's going on with you and Jenna?" I asked, my voice shaky but controlled. Dave's face shifted ever so slightly, and I could see the realization dawning on him. He didn't answer immediately, but the silence between us said everything I needed to know. My heart sank. "Nothing's going on," he said finally, but there was a nervous edge to his voice that I couldn't ignore. He moved toward me, trying to close the gap between us, but I stepped back. "Then why is she texting you like that?" I asked, my voice rising despite my attempt to keep it even. Dave's expression faltered, his eyes shifting away from mine as if he were searching for the right words. But there was no way to explain this away. The evidence was in his phone, staring me in the face. He hesitated, rubbing the back of his neck, clearly struggling with how to explain. "Look, it's not what you think. It was a mistake. I never meant for this to happen." I felt a wave of nausea hit me. A mistake? A mistake wasn't sending messages like that, not when we had been together for so long. I felt the anger start to build inside me, bubbling just beneath the surface. "You're telling me you didn't mean to get involved with her? How long has this been going on?" Dave didn't answer right away. His eyes shifted to the floor, and I could see the guilt written all over his face. That was enough of an answer for me. The silence spoke volumes. "Tell me the truth, Dave," I demanded, the pressure building in my chest. "How long have you been seeing her?" He sighed deeply, and when he finally spoke, his voice was barely a whisper. "It started a few months ago. She was going through a rough time, and I was just trying to be there for her. But I didn't expect it to go this far." I could feel my heart break with each word. I had never imagined that something like this would happen to me, not in a million years. All those times I'd trusted him, believed in us, none of it seemed to matter now. He had betrayed me in the worst way possible. "So, you've been seeing her behind my back?" I asked, my voice shaking with a mixture of rage and sorrow. "It's not like that," he pleaded. "I never wanted to hurt you. It just," he broke off, clearly at a loss for words. The truth was out, and it was uglier than I could have ever imagined. I had been right to suspect something, but I never expected it to be like this. I took a step back, feeling the weight of everything crashing down on me. How could you? I whispered, my voice cracking. Dave reached out to touch my arm, but I pulled away from him. I couldn't be near him, not when everything was falling apart. I needed space, I needed clarity, and most of all, I needed to get away from him. You don't get it, he said, frustration creeping into his tone. I never wanted to hurt you, but I don't know what to do now. I messed up. The words hung in the air between us, but they didn't feel like an apology. They felt like excuses. I had always known that relationships weren't perfect, but this was something I couldn't come back from. He had crossed a line, and nothing he could say would undo what had already been done. I need some time, I said quietly, my voice barely a whisper. It was the only thing I could say without breaking down completely. The door had been opened, and now I could see the truth in all its ugly reality. There was no going back. The following days felt like a haze. I couldn't look at Dave the same way. Every time he spoke, I felt this knot in my stomach tighten. His presence had once been comforting, but now it was a constant reminder of the betrayal. I went through the motions of daily life, cooking meals, going to work, trying to pretend everything was normal. But inside, I was falling apart. The weight of the truth was suffocating. The trust I'd placed in him, the belief that we were a team, had been shattered. It wasn't just the affair that hurt, it was the lies, the deceit, and the fact that I had been oblivious to it all. I couldn't escape the nagging thoughts. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw Jenna's face. Her late-night visit, the way she had looked at Dave, the subtle hints in her words, they haunted me. I tried to block it out, but I couldn't stop thinking about the two of them. How long had this been going on? Had I been blind to the signs, or had they both hidden it so well? The more I thought about it, the more the reality of the situation set in. I wasn't just hurt, I was angry. Angry at Dave for betraying me, angry at Jenna for coming into our lives and complicating everything. But most of all, I was angry at myself for not seeing the truth sooner. Dave had apologized over and over, begging for another chance. He said it was a mistake, that it was nothing serious, that he never wanted to hurt me. But every time he said it, the words felt hollow. There was no excuse for what he'd done. I couldn't reconcile the man I thought I knew with the one who had lied to my face. The more he tried to make amends, the more distant I became. It wasn't enough to hear him say he was sorry. He had crossed a line, and I didn't know if I could ever look at him the same way again. The hardest part was figuring out what to do next. I had no idea how to move forward. Part of me wanted to leave, to walk away from everything and start fresh. But another part of me was clinging to the idea of us, of what we had before this all came crashing down. We had shared so much over the years, laughter, dreams, even our fears. How could I throw all of that away because of one mistake? But then, as I thought about it more, I realized it wasn't just one mistake. It was a series of lies and betrayals, and I had to decide whether or not I could forgive him for that. In the days that followed, I distanced myself from Dave. I stayed in the bedroom, avoiding any real conversations. He tried to talk to me, tried to explain, but his words felt like a constant reminder of his betrayal. I didn't want to hear him. I didn't want to look at him. I just wanted space. It was then that I realized I had been living in denial. I had been so focused on saving the relationship, on keeping things together, that I had ignored the signs. Dave wasn't the man I thought he was, and neither was Jenna. The realization hit me like a ton of bricks. I had been so wrapped up in our perfect little world that I had ignored the cracks forming beneath the surface. Finally, I couldn't keep pretending. I had to face the truth. I needed to know the full extent of what had happened. I couldn't live with the uncertainty any longer. I sat Dave down and told him I needed answers. I needed to know when it all started, how it started, and why it had happened. He hesitated at first, clearly struggling with the weight of his actions. But then slowly, he started to open up. He admitted that the affair with Jenna had been going on for months, that it had started innocently enough, just friendly chats, a little bit of attention when she needed it. But somewhere along the way, things crossed a line. He claimed it wasn't physical at first, but that didn't matter to me. The emotional betrayal was enough. He had been emotionally invested in someone else, and that was just as hurtful as anything else. He told me that he hadn't intended for it to get so serious, that it had all spiraled out of control. But that explanation didn't make me feel better. The damage was done. I felt numb as I listened to him, as if I were detached from the situation. I kept asking myself, how could he do this? How could he betray me like this and think it was okay? By the end of the conversation, I was exhausted, mentally and emotionally drained. I didn't know what I expected from him, but the answers I got didn't bring me any closure. The truth was there was no fixing this. There was no going back to the way things were. Our relationship had been tainted, and nothing could wash away the stain. I spent the next few days in a haze of confusion, trying to figure out what I should do. Every part of me screamed to walk away, to take control of my life and move on. But another part of me was still holding on, wondering if there was any chance of salvaging what we had left. I didn't have any clear answers, just a sense of emptiness that I couldn't shake. In the end, I knew I had to make a decision. I had to decide whether to stay and try to rebuild, or leave and start over. But even as I thought about the future, I knew one thing for certain. I would never look at love the same way again. The idea of trust, of partnership, had been shattered in a way I couldn't ignore. And no matter what happened next, I knew my life would never be the same.